In August 2024, Sony released a new multiplayer game called Concord. On paper, it looked like a serious PlayStation project. It had a major publisher behind it, a new science fiction universe, cinematic trailers, a full cast of characters, and the promise of becoming Sony's next long-term live service game. This was not supposed to be a small experiment. It was supposed to become the beginning of something bigger, but almost immediately after launch, something went wrong. The game came out, players barely arrived, sales stopped, refunds were offered, and just 14 days after release, Concord was taken offline. Most games fail slowly. They lose players over months or years. Concord failed in public almost instantly. And that is what makes this story so strange. This was not an unknown game from a tiny studio. This was PlayStation. It had money, marketing, and years of work behind it. And still, it disappeared faster than almost anyone expected. Not every failed project is made from concrete, steel, and glass. Some failed projects are built from code, marketing, and expectations. A ghost airport can stand empty because the passengers never came. A failed game can become a digital ghost town because the players never arrived. Concord became one of the clearest examples of that. It was not just a game that struggled. It became a warning about crowded markets, expensive live service streams, and what happens when a company builds something for an audience that never shows up. Concord was designed as a 5 versus 5, character-driven, first-person multiplayer shooter. In simple words, it was a hero shooter. Players would choose different characters, each with their own abilities, roles, personalities, and visual style. The game was set in a colorful science fiction universe with a crew of guns for hire called Free Gunners. Sony and Firewalk Studios were not just trying to sell one multiplayer shooter. They were trying to create a world. They wanted characters people would remember, teams people would discuss, and a universe players would return to again and again. The plan was clear. Launch the game, keep updating it, add more content over time, and slowly build a living multiplayer universe. On paper, that sounds reasonable. Many of the biggest games in the world work this way. But the problem was not only the idea. The problem was the timing, the market, and the question players kept asking. Why should I play this instead of everything else? To understand Concord, you have to understand the live service dream. For a company, a successful live service game is not just a product. It is a machine. Players return for seasons, events, new characters, updates, cosmetics, battle passes, and limited time rewards. A normal game might sell once. A successful live service game can earn for years. That is why so many companies want one. They do not just want a hit game, they want a habit. They want a game that becomes part of a player's weekly routine. Fortnite did it. Apex Legends did it. Valorant did it. Overwatch did it before its own problems started growing. From a business perspective, it made sense for Sony to want a piece of that market. But wanting a live service success and actually building one are two completely different things. Players do not have unlimited time. They do not have unlimited money. And they definitely do not have unlimited attention. Concord entered a market that was already crowded. By the time it arrived, players already had their multiplayer games. They had their friends lists. They had their favorite characters. They had their skins, ranks, habits, and communities. That matters more than companies sometimes admit. A multiplayer game is not only competing against other games. It is competing against friendship groups, routines, years of progress, and the feeling of already belonging somewhere. If your friends are already playing Fortnite, Valorant, Apex, Call of Duty, or Overwatch, a new game has to give you a very strong reason to leave. Being decent is not enough. Being polished is not enough. Even being fun may not be enough. A new multiplayer game has to answer one brutal question immediately. Why should everyone move? Concord never gave enough people a strong answer. The second problem was the price. Concord was not free to play at launch. It was a paid multiplayer game in a market where many of its biggest competitors were free to start. That does not automatically make a game fail. Paid games can still succeed. But for a new live service shooter, it creates friction. A free game asks for your time. A paid game asks for your money before it proves that your friends will stay. That is a much harder sell. If a player is curious about a free game, they can download it, try one match, and leave if they do not like it. But if a player is curious about a paid multiplayer game, they have to make a decision before they even know whether the community will survive. For Concord, that was dangerous. Live service games need momentum. They need people online. They need fast matchmaking. They need clips, discussion, jokes, arguments, and the feeling that something is happening. Without that, even a technically playable game can feel empty. The third problem was identity. Concord had characters, a universe, and a visual style. But for many players, it did not create instant attachment. That is a huge problem for a hero shooter. In this genre, characters are not just gameplay tools. They are the marketing. They are the memes. They are the reason people make fan art, argue online, pick favorites, and remember the game before they even play it. A hero shooter needs characters that people instantly recognize. Characters that make players say, I want to play as that one. I want to know more about that one. I want to show that character to my friends. Concord tried to build a crew, but it did not create enough cultural gravity. The characters existed. The world existed. The trailers existed. But the emotional hook was not strong enough to pull a mass audience in. The fourth problem was urgency. A major multiplayer launch needs to feel like an event. Players need to feel like they will miss something if they do not show up early. They need to see clips everywhere. They need excitement, discoveries, controversy, and a little bit of chaos. A new multiplayer game cannot quietly enter the room. It has to make noise. Concord did not create that kind of moment. For many people, it felt like the game appeared, was noticed for a second, and then immediately became a question. Who is this for? That question is deadly. Because when players ask who a game is for, they are usually also asking, is it for me? And if they cannot answer that quickly, they move on. The internet moves fast. Gaming audiences move even faster. A weak first impression can become permanent before a game gets a second chance. Then came the part that turned Concord from a disappointing launch into a historic failure. The game launched on August 23, 2024. Less than 2 weeks later, on September 3rd, PlayStation announced that Concord would be taken offline beginning September 6th. Sales would stop immediately. Players who bought the game would receive refunds. Think about how unusual that is. Games get bad reviews all the time. Games launch with bugs all the time. Games lose players all the time. But a major publisher pulling a new live service game offline after just 2 weeks is something different. It sends a message, not just to players, not just to critics, but to the entire industry. The message was simple. This did not land. And it did not land badly enough that Sony was willing to stop the entire game almost immediately. At first, there was a small possibility that Concord could return in another form. Maybe as a free-to-play game, maybe with changes, maybe with a different strategy. But that possibility did not last. In October 2024, Sony announced that Concord would be permanently sunset and Firewalk Studios would close. That changed the story again. Now Concord was not just a failed product. It was the only released game from a studio that was shutting down shortly after launch. That is the human side of this kind of failure. Behind every failed game, there are artists, designers, writers, engineers, producers, animators, testers, and people who spent years building something they hoped would work. The internet often turns failure into a joke. But inside the studio, failure is not a meme. It is careers, time, pressure, and disappointment. Concord became a punchline online, but for the people who built it, it was the end of a project, and for many, the end of a workplace. So what was Concord's real mistake? It is too easy to say the game was bad. That is simple, but it is not enough. The more useful answer is this. Concord was built like a long-term platform before it had earned short-term attention. It had plans for updates, characters, and a universe. But first, it needed players to care. That is the part many live service projects underestimate. You cannot start with the assumption that people will stay. First, you have to convince them to arrive. A live service game is not alive because the company says it is. It is alive because players keep choosing it every day, every week, over everything else. Concord tried to enter one of the hardest spaces in gaming with a product that was not clearly different enough, not accessible enough, and not exciting enough at the exact moment it needed to be. The lesson of Concord is not that companies should stop making multiplayer games. It is not that new intellectual property is impossible. And it is not that every live service game is doomed. The lesson is sharper than that. A big company can fund a game. It can market a game. It can build trailers, characters, roadmaps, and plans. But it cannot manufacture desire on command. Players are not empty seats waiting to be filled. They already have games. They already have communities. They already have habits. To break through, a new game has to feel necessary. Not just available, not just polished, necessary. Concord never reached that point. It was a game asking for long-term commitment before enough players had even developed short-term curiosity. Concord failed fast because the market did not wait. It did not wait for the game to grow. It did not wait for the universe to become beloved. It did not wait for future updates to fix the first impression. The silence came first. And in a live service game, silence is dangerous. No crowded servers, no cultural moment, no strong reason to switch. Just a new game in a market full of old habits. Concord was not just shut down after 14 days. It became a warning about what happens when a project is built around the dream of long-term success, but misses the first requirement, getting people to care. Some failures are built from concrete, some are built from code, and some are built from expectations that were never strong enough to survive contact with reality. Not according to plan. Big promises, bigger mistakes.